what is burnout, how it affects you, what are some of the symptoms that occur when you have or feel burnt out, and what you can do to improve it or even get out of it and avoid yourself getting back into a state of burnout. When you think of burnout, you think of a position whereby you are chronically stressed and you're unable to meet the demands of what you're expected to meet. And the reason this happens again is that it catches you off guard, because in a perfect world, we're trying to push through hard, difficult, challenging situations because we know that we can get stronger and we can get better once we pass it. Burnout is multifaceted, and there are many factors that go in. And again, as I mentioned earlier, it is a spectrum. And picking it up early and often finding solutions to avoiding it in the future and also getting you in the best health that you can be is very important. So if you find yourself in a position where you're going through burnout, or you've been through burnout, or you feel like you're getting to a point where it's getting really bad, please speak to a health professional, find someone that you can talk to and get the help that you need. Welcome back to Peak Performance Hacks, and this is the place where we help you stay focused, energized, and on top of your game. I'm your host, Dr. Gan, and on today's episode, I'm actually going to be diving deep into a very important topic that has become front and center, has been around for a very long time, but after the pandemic, it has become even more relevant, and that is burnout. Now, to start off with, I would like to dive into what is burnout, how it affects you, what are some of the symptoms that occur when you have or feel burnt out, and what you can do to improve it or even get out of it and avoid yourself getting back into a state of burnout. Now, with the definition, it's often a very difficult one because it hasn't really been defined properly. In the most simplistic form, when you think of burnout, you think of a position whereby you are chronically stressed and you're unable to meet the demands of what you're expected to meet. So, for example, if you worked in a workplace, this could mean that you've had an increase in workload. And for example, you may have had other colleagues doing various different jobs or tasks, and all of a sudden they have left and you have been asked to do the same task. So essentially, you're doing your job or your position and plus the position or jobs of other people as well. And in the medical industry, for example, when you think of nurses and doctors and during the time of the pandemic, this had become a lot more common because of the fact that there were people that were not sick. And so if you were in a healthcare industry, you would have been asked to do more um, for with less people. And because when you think of burnout, it was essentially thought of a problem that only affected service people. So this includes nurses, doctors, it could involve even firemen, it could involve teachers, it could involve police officers. But the reality is, burnout can affect everyone from parents to even people working in the offices, CEOs, directors, and even professional athletes. Now, because the definition is a little bit skewed in terms of it is a little bit gray, there are a lot of hypotheses around why it actually happens. But the if I were to break it down in its simplest form, it has three sort of main categories. The first one would be physical fatigue. The second one would be emotional exhaustion. And finally, you have cognitive impairment. I can only imagine that most people at some stage in their lives would have experienced burnout. Now, when you're pushed to the limits whereby your workload has increased, or you have a whole bunch of different tasks to do that you did not have to do initially, this can lead to burnout eventually. And that's the chronic stress that eventually builds up. Now, for myself, I also remember when I had children, that was a sort of a new part of my life whereby there was all this responsibility and that increased workload that I had, and also the pressures of being a parent and trying to be the best parent that you can be. There's also people who have or are caring for people that are elderly or even children that they're having to care for who are ill. And again, that this can be an increased burden on them and also increasing their stress levels and eventually leading to burnout. Now, what are some of the commonest symptoms of burnout? Now, there's a whole bunch of them. One of them could be including reduction in memory, or you feeling that your short-term memory has been affected, reduction in concentration levels, feeling fatigued or even exhausted, feeling like you're not enjoying the things that you used to enjoy. Others could be body aches and headaches, being annoyed or irritated by really trivial things, finding it hard to make decisions or even second guessing yourself, not sleeping well, not eating well, having decreased appetite. Now, I won't fault you if you heard these symptoms and thought that they were actually related to what some people may consider a depressed individual or someone who is quite anxious. And I believe because of that overlap between anxiety, depression, and also burnout, this is potentially also the reason why it often gets missed and doesn't get picked up early. As I've spoken about stress in another episode, one of the most important things to remember here is that stress is actually a good thing. So, the only way you're going to grow, develop, and learn is actually to stress yourself. So, if you're doing a task that you've never done before, it is going to be stressful until it becomes easier. And that adaptation, whereby you're learning and you're actually improving and getting a bit better, is actually a healthy, stressful response. The problem arises when you reach a point when you actually go over that stressful threshold and you push yourself. So that normal stress is sometimes known as allostasis, and pushing yourself and going further past that level whereby you feel you've hit your threshold and gone past is known as allostatic loading. And there are a lot of papers, including some of the studies from McEwen, who has shown that by actually loading yourself or pushing yourself beyond that threshold, that's when the body and also the mind sort of breaks down. And it can lead to a whole cascade of events, including imbalances in your hormone levels, your immune system being affected, and even leading to illnesses and even disease. So, to really understand how burnout sort of develops, we sort of have an idea of the stress levels that lead to burnout. But then what really modulates the whole stress reaction that we have when we are pushed beyond our limits? It comes down to two factors. One of them is the HPA axis, also known as your hypothalamo pituitary axis. And you've got your autonomic nervous system, which again I've spoken about before in the last episode, when it comes down to sympathetic and parasympathetic activity. Now, to really simplify it without going into details, every time we're put in a position that stresses us, this then causes release of hormones in order to actually manage the stress and also to increase the energy so that we can get through it. And our autonomic nervous system helps by increasing our heart rate and improving our breathing, increasing our breathing as well, in order for us to increase the energy and get through that stressful period. It's important to remember that this is a spectrum and it is not a destination. And what I mean by it is that when the process of burnout starts, it's actually the early stages whereby we're pushing past our limits. And I think the biggest challenge for most people, especially if you're a high achiever or peak performer, is that because of the growth and learning, it's almost normal to feel that you need to push through it. And I believe I've been burnt out probably about 3 or 4 times in my entire life and career. And I would say for the first couple of times, because I thought I was invincible and because I thought I had to push through it, I've actually missed it when it already had started. And by the time I actually felt burnt out, I was probably about 3 to 6 months down the track when I started feeling listless and feeling like I wasn't enjoying what I was doing anymore. And the reason this happens again is that it catches you off guard because in a perfect world, we're trying to push through hard, difficult, challenging situations because we know that we can get stronger and we can get better once we pass it. It would be similar to the example of when you work out on your own and you push yourself and you feel you had a great workout, and then you work out with someone else or a personal trainer and you feel like you still had 15% more in the tank and they seem to push you to the point where you got that 15% as well. And so similarly, in situations where you're trying to push yourself, it's very easy to sort of overreach and pass that limit, whereby you then go into chronic stressful state. If left unchecked, a lot of times burnout can be related with mental health disorders such as anxiety, depression, and also substance abuse because you're trying to find a way out and you're trying to find a way where you can feel better, when you're going down this rabbit hole and you're feeling worse and worse each day. So, what can you do if you've noticed symptoms of burnout? Now, the first and most important one would be to have the awareness to notice that it's happening. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I missed it the first two times when it happened to me because I just thought to myself that this is nothing. This is just a big day that I've had, and it's not a problem at all, and I can push through it. The challenge I have most of the time is that I actually care for people a lot. And there are a lot of people in the service industry, especially in the health industry. And this is very common because I used to believe that my patients are worse off and they need my help more than I need to take care of myself. So, actually having that awareness to know that it's happening is probably the first place that you need to start at. The second place or the second thing you should be doing is that you need to talk to someone you can trust. Now, this doesn't have to be professional services. It could be a friend or someone working at work that you can actually trust and you feel that you can get it off your chest by talking about how you're actually feeling. Now, talking can be very therapeutic, and just having that conversation with someone else and letting them listen and then giving you feedback is often a really good way to help you sort of be aware of that is happening and also look at potential options of what you can do to get yourself out of this position. You could see a counselor, a psychologist, or even a psychiatrist if you think that you're getting to that point where you're feeling really low, depressed, and you've reached that stage. Even talking to your general practitioner would be a great place to start because it gets the ball moving rather than waiting for it to get worse. The next thing I would suggest is self care. Now, the first thing that happens when you go through burnout is that you stop doing the things that make you happy, and you also stop doing things that was actually helping you feel better. So this could mean you were not you stopped exercising if you used to exercise, you stopped meditating, you stopped doing the sports and activities and hobbies that you loved, and you just let yourself go. You probably started eating badly, probably didn't sleep as well, and you were just doing activities or even substance abuse would come in. So having that care for yourself, putting yourself first by sleeping well, exercising, eating well, moving, even meditating, hobbies, those are the things that you should then focus on by basically stopping or almost causing a reset to say that I'm going through this now. I need to do something before it gets worse. The other thing I would suggest is attend to urgent health matters. And what I mean by that is that if physically you're feeling like your blood pressure has gone up, or you're feeling sick, or you have other physical medical conditions that have just worsened as a result of the burnout, you need to attend to this immediately. And again, it sort of goes hand in hand with self care, but not everyone has medical conditions, or not everyone's going through a physical condition. And again, you need to seek a health practitioner in order to get help for this. Now, if you're at the stage where mentally you're not in a good place, again, as I mentioned earlier, counselor, psychologist, psychiatrist, your GP would probably, or your primary health care doctor would probably be the first place that you would need to go and seek help in order to get that sorted out. Next, I would work on communication at your workplace. Now, the reason I put this before even stress management is that if you know what the cause of your problem is, so if it's at work, the workload is too much, if it's your own business and you just find that everything has become so difficult and you're having issues with staffing and management, then you need to actually hit the reset button and find a way where you can improve this situation whereby it is hiring others, whereby it's actually talking to your managers or your directors or your superiors above to find a common ground where it would benefit both people, but most importantly, help with your health. So you may be transparent about talking about what you're going through, but even if you're not, you can have that conversation to say that you just think that would be better for your health if you had a varied sort of workplace arrangement, whether it's working from home or whatever it may be that would be useful for you, or your grievances with the workload that you have to do. Now, the next would be stress management. Now, stress management techniques is really interesting because for a very long time I used to do it, and I've been meditating for potentially almost 20 years, and it's not a brag, but essentially I was using meditation as a way to sort of control stresses, to control my emotions, and to even increase energy levels. But the problem a lot of peak performers or high achievers have is that they they don't actually tackle the problem, but they use meditation as a way to sort of optimize themselves so that they actually perform at a higher level. So having the proper stress management techniques, whether it's breathing, meditation, yoga, exercising, anything that helps you manage the stress is a good thing, but you have to sort of nip it at the bud and find out what the source of the stress is. And the final point I would like to make is that oftentimes with burnout, it is work related, or it could be family related, or it could be a situational challenge. And finding the solution to that, whether it be workplace and finding another career path, or even finding a better position, or if it's a relationship issue, finding a place where you're not stretched to the max may sometimes be the answer. Now, for many people hearing this, they may say that's a cop out. You're running away from your problems and you're not growing and you're not developing. And to me, I would say that you need to take care of yourself. It's not about what other people think. It's not about what you say about yourself as well. If you go down that rabbit hole of going into burnout, it never leads to a good place. And oftentimes your health is affected more than anything, both mentally and physically. And so if you felt that you were in a position that you didn't think you could come out of because the work arrangements wasn't working or the stress load was very high, then it would be time for you to now think of another solution. And it is often the hardest thing to do because breaking up or creating a new change is often very hard anyways. And for some people, they've been working in this organization or they've been working in this career or position for many years, and it almost feels like it's what would you do next and how would you start again? And it's often too hard, which is sometimes the reason why many people stick in relationships that are toxic and make them unhappy, because of the fact that it's hard to make the move. Now, if you're someone who's going through this and you're finding it challenging, then there's a lot of people that you can talk to, and there's a lot of solutions out there without feeling that you're stuck and there's no way out of this. Burnout is multifaceted and there are many factors that go in. And again, as I mentioned earlier, it is a spectrum. And picking it up early and often finding solutions to avoiding it in the future and also getting you in the best health that you can be is very important. So if you find yourself in a position where you're going through burnout or you've been through burnout or you feel like you're getting to a point where it's getting really bad, please speak to a health professional, find someone that you can talk to and get the help that you need, because it is all around us and not many people talk about it, but most people go through it at some stage of their lives. If you found this episode beneficial and you know someone that needs to hear about it, please feel free to share this with them. This wraps up this episode of Peak Performance Hacks. All the links and resources are in the video description or in the resource section, whether it is on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. If you're watching this on YouTube, please consider subscribing. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please leave us a review so that more people can discover our podcast and it could benefit them as well. Until I catch you next time, speak soon.